Good evening, Namaskara. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you to the virtual town hall, which is the grand finale of a 5 seminar webinar series, which has discussed how to get Bengaluru moving again. The main thrust has been that we've had a lockdown, and during that lockdown, we've had to encounter numerous challenges and to the way we think about ourselves as a city, how we are going to move, get around, get goods and services around in the course of the next few months as we recover and try to cope with the pandemic at the same time. So this is a time when we've brought a large number of activists, experts, policymakers, and other concerned citizens together. And today we will also be bringing in a group of very proactive, innovative youngsters who will also be sharing their views and ideas with policymakers. So what have we been up to? One of the main thrusts has been how to get public transport moving again, because one of the things that the pandemic has done is it has affected our willingness to be on platforms which involve lots of other people. So how do you make public transport viable? How do you make it safer? How do you ensure that we can think about different ways of moving Bengalurians? That is really the broad theme of what we're all focused on. Now, today, we're going to be having a series of presentations and discussions. We have one of our partners. This is the Young Leaders for Active Citizenship, and their mobility champions are going to be presenting their work to do two different sets of policymakers. The first set of policymakers are going to be the current and former chairman of the Bengaluru Metropolitan Transport Corporation, that is Sri Nandish Reddy and Sri N.A. Harris. And the second presentations are going to be to a panel which is going to discuss first and last mile connectivity. Along with that, we have WILAC organized hackathon, where the youngsters who win that hackathon are going to present their work. And there again, we're going to have another very interesting set of panelists. The panelists who are on both panels include the Principal Secretary, Transport, Government of Karnataka, Mr. Anjum Parvez, and the Joint Commissioner of Police for Traffic, Dr. Ravikante Gowda. And then in the first panel, the hackathon winners panel, we also have Atira Menon of Uber, and we have Kamal Bali of Volvo, who is going to be part of that panel. And then for the other panel, which is going to discuss first and last mile connectivity, we also have Revati Ashok of BPAC joining in, and we have Rajiv Agarwal, who heads public policy for India with Uber, also joining in there. And we have an expert coming in the form of Pawan Mulukutla, and from the World Resources Institute, India. So these are the panel discussions. We also, following my introduction right now, we're going to have the team from the Environment Support Group, Leo Saldana and Bhargavi Rao, telling us about their work on making transport more accessible and inclusive. Later on, we're going to have BPAC also coming in with Revati Ashok telling us about how we plan to take things forward in the months to come. One of the best things about this whole exercise has been how all of us have been able to come together across different organizations in a very, very non-political, cooperative, constructive set of engagements and discussions. We've been able to bring in a certain buzz in the media, in social media, amongst students and others. And in the process, we've been able to essentially harness that creative, constructive energy that Bengaluru is known for the overall benefit of all of our citizens. One of the things that has stood out in our discussions has been the cooperation between the private sector and the public sector during the lockdown, how data sharing took place, how ride sharing and other app-based companies came together and supported the government in helping to manage the pandemic. We have also had some amazing discussions on sustainable transport. We've been talking about new ways to get people in Bengaluru moving again, talking about things like bicycle lanes, they're talking about innovation, and it's just been a very fascinating set of presentations. We will have these all on the Bengaluru Needs You Facebook page shortly, and you'll be able to check this out. And so before I hand over, I should introduce myself once more. I'm Rajeev Gowda. I'm the founder and managing trustee of the Resurgent India Trust, which runs the Bengaluru Needs You initiative. And I'm a former member of parliament and a former member of the faculty at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Over to you to ESG.
Thank you, Rajeev, and thank you all for this opportunity to present our sort of, I wouldn't say findings, but a collation of what came out of the Better Bus Bengaluru campaign that we ran as part of the Bengaluru movie series. My colleague Bhargavi had to pull out at the very last minute. My apologies for that. On that note, let me turn on the presentation I have. So what we did was, when we worked on this as part of this overall campaign to get Bengaluru moving, I think Bengaluru was stuck. We realized that it's not just the fact that you have to put more buses on the road, but you have to also make space for buses. But when you have to make space for buses, it's not going to happen unless you actually reorganize the city from what it is now. Because the city is more or less like this. Between 73 and 2020, we have by and large built up every bit of the built area of Bengaluru, which is about roughly about 1,000 square kilometers. And we have packed almost 1 crore plus people. That's about 10 million plus people inside it. And rather disparate, not necessarily all are living in congested neighborhoods. Some live in extraordinarily congested neighborhoods, and some in very sparsely inhabited areas. But by and large, the issue is that we are actually building up the city in such a way that there is no space for any greenery. So the question is, what does greenery have to do with mobility? And we argued that there is plenty of it. And in the 5-part series that we ran, webinar series that we ran, we realized that we're actually more accessible to each other virtually than in real life. That's an interesting takeaway we had, because we could actually access people who were otherwise very busy in positions of power, willing to take time off and come together. But then when we thought deeply about why they did that, it's possibly because most often we don't accept invitations to participate in various meetings because it takes so long to get across the city now. In the past, I just was cleaning up my attic and I found diaries from the 1990s when what I did in a day today would take me a week to accomplish. So we have become such a useless city in terms of how we manage our time and space. And so we realized that this could be one reason why, that we have just mindlessly built up the city. And here we are. That's how built up Bangalore is today. There's hardly any space even for water to flow. And when water doesn't flow, it damages. And therefore, the infrastructure we built to let us move around gets destroyed, as we have seen happen now with the rains. And this, to your left, is not a typical scene. It's one of the few roads where we actually have a bus lane, which was built in as an afterthought last year, but I'm not so sure it's functional now. So this is a problem we have in a city where we throw in things as an afterthought. When you actually construct a plan for the city and you build roads, we don't build these roads for public transport. We build it essentially for private transport. And then we say, oh, where's the bus lane? And try to fit in a bus lane there. And there are all sorts of problems that we run into because the ingress and egress into a bus is not so well planned out. To the right is a slide one of our panelists in one of the 5 webinars we ran, Dasarathi, brought up how, for instance, if we actually took all these people and put them in a bus, much of the road space would be available for more buses, which means less and less of us should really need to drive. And that means the road infrastructure will also be far better because less and less vehicles will be using it. We also understood through the series that there is an emphasis on heavy engineering structure, like building flyovers and elevated corridors for, when the world over, these are being toned down and turned into walking and cycling and busing zones, we are doing the opposite here. It's almost like we are regressing in urban planning, and there seems to be absolutely no thinking, especially in the senior leadership of the political and bureaucratic administration, to understand that this is a wrong way to go, or perhaps there is an unwillingness to understand, and there is a greater emphasis on, the metro, for instance. Now that the metro is being built, the question is, why is the metro being built as if it's a standalone system? You will see that in phase 1 of the metro, almost every station of the metro is inaccessible, either for buses or for private vehicles. I mean, you really end up, every metro station has become a congestion point. And it's not surprising, because we predicted this in 2008, even took a PIL to the Karnataka High Court, and the court gave directions, but the directions were not implemented. As a result, 50, 60 stations become congestion points. The metro becomes a major investment destination. And it's almost like the city is being reorganized wherever the metro goes, because of the floor area ratios going up. You have high density corridors coming up, which further densifies the metro corridor to the disadvantage of the overall city. Now, someone needs to sit back and, in the government and in the metro planning and say, this is not how you make a city functional. This is how you make a city dysfunctional. Whereas, look at how the buses run. I mean, where are the facilities for the buses? Where is the financial investment for the buses? Where are the international loans for the buses? None of that seems to be a priority even now. So this is one of the key takeaways from a session that we had. We also found that many people who came from the, who are bus commuters and people who are organizing bus commuters found that the bus fares are extremely unaffordable. We must realize that the pandemic has made economic status worse for everybody, especially the poor and the working classes. And the working classes depend on bus systems in Bangalore. And considering that about 45 lakhs, that's 4.5 million people use the bus, in contrast with less than 5 lakh people who use the metro. And consider the investment in the bus. Did you ever see 1,000 crores being invested in the bus? But you will see 40,000 crores being invested in the metro. Most of it is by loans, which are expensive and not being serviced properly. So we have this type of very huge economic disparity in terms of how we attend to two forms of bus transport. And further, the disparity is passed on to the bus users who should be subsidized. In fact, we argued, why should we even, in fact, Nishika, for instance, said, why should we even think of the bus as a transport corporation, which has to be profit-oriented? Why can't it be service-oriented like it was before? Which means that we can subsidize bus fares so that more people use buses, and we put more buses on the road, and there will be less traffic, cleaner air, and so on. I don't have to explain that. But all this is also because we do not have a mobility plan. There was an attempt by BMRCL to put up a mobility plan earlier this year and last year, but it's been controversial because BMRCL is not a planning agency. It is not required and should not, as an agency which is promoting a particular type of public transport, building an imagination of the city based on the metro, for instance. Or to put it differently, a mobility plan should evolve from the corporation, from the city municipality, from the wards. After we collate all the mobility plans of wards, then we assemble together the mobility plan for the entire city. But what we now have is a mobility plan which has been created by a parastatal, and it is not a democratic exercise. So there has been these discussions also came up in the webinars, and we asked, why are we thinking of cities when most people are going to live in cities as entities that have to be run by undemocratic parastatals? Why can't we genuinely democratize urban governance and ensure that our city planning is subordinate to democratic processes? Thereby, the poor, the working classes also get to use the city as equally as the elite and the richer, higher income groups do now. So these disparities will also be attended to when you have a more democratic exercise. Then we found, for instance, accessibility. I mean, this is common experience to all of us. Even if you have 2 feet which are firmly on the ground, you don't know where to put the next foot down, because it's not uncommon that people get sucked into drains. But what if you don't have 2 feet to walk? What if you have to, what if you are blind? One of our panelists was visually challenged, and she couldn't, she said that today's Bangalore is far more difficult for her to navigate than the Bangalore of the 1990s. There we have on the left side Ken Krukemeyer, who's worked with as a Boston commissioner. And one of the things he did was it helped to tear down a flyover and put a walking path through Boston, which is known as Braddock Park. and about 8 or 10 miles of it. And the way he did it was he actually went and held street meetings. According to what I remember, about 500 to 600 street meetings were held so that he could assemble the views of the people, and then he turned what was a high crime elevated corridor zone into absolutely no crime and a much more, if you go to Braddock Park today, it's a thriving part of Boston. The real estate values have gone up simply because it's so much more charming today. Similar is the experience of Seoul, where they tore down a flyover and let a river flow through the city. Now, what we have in Bangalore is so similar possibilities. We have 840 kilometers of Rajya ways, which we can turn them into accessible ways. This year, the Chief Minister has made a remarkable announcement that he will actually fund the reclaiming of Rajya way as an accessible space, as a green space. So we discovered that greening the city, making sure we actually accommodate pedestrian zones, fully accessible pedestrian zones, will also make bus use much more convenient. Then we had sessions in which several people, especially women, spoke about how difficult it is to use the bus, how harassment is very, very common, and even sexual abuse, right? And there is a very serious problem here, that when a woman cannot use the bus as comfortably as a man, or a child cannot use the bus as comfortably as an adult, I think we have a very, very problematic city. We need to acknowledge it so that we start working on it. We don't have to wait for women to step out and protest. That's a terrible indicator of no attention being paid by the services as well as the police, or just all of us, I think. So this is a very serious challenge which came up. And so if public transport has to be mainstay, everyone needs to be more comfortable in using public transport. Now, what do you say about this? It's everywhere in Bangalore today. I mean, the city has never been as horribly broken down as it is now. So where are you going to cycle? Where are you going to walk? So where is walking and mobility as part of the public transport options? Why is it not my fundamental right to walk and cycle from anywhere to anywhere else, or bus from anywhere to anywhere else? Why is everything being so focused on heavy engineering, elevated corridors, metros? Why can't we actually imagine the city in which you step out of your house and you feel safe walking anywhere, cycling anywhere? A child can cycle, an adult can cycle. You see, that is how Bangalore was. We all grew up, so those of us who grew up in Bangalore remember that we all loved to cycle around the city. And it was not such a big risk. Today, going out on a cycle is either you have to be a sports person, or you have to be extremely adventurous, because it is not a common form of mobility. So from a point where it was a very, very common form of mobility, walking and cycling, we have turned it into an hazard. So this needs to change fundamentally. Of course, we had students from the Yugma network, for instance, who were arguing for carbon neutral mobility. Now, cycling is a form of carbon neutral mobility. Now, this image on the right, why can't we see it in Bangalore? Why can't a mother or a father take their children out in such beautifully designed cycles? Now, of course, design is simply not part of our conception, because if you take a Paura Karmika dragging garbage, it has never evolved from the 1970s. So that's the kind of situation we are in. And
Leo, sorry to interrupt, but we are out of time. We've really gone over time. Can we just finish the last point? Let's finish the last point, please. Yeah.
So we also came up with the question of, if you have more street vendors, the streets will be more safe. So street vendors should not be seen as a liability. They should have a natural right, and the Street Vendors Act needs to be implemented, and we need to redesign. The pedestrianization of Gandhi Bazaar project came up as a possibility. And finally, we also felt that the bus commuters need to come together and organize themselves so that they can assert their right to the road, and not what it is now. And I want to end by saying that we have put up the webinar on our website. And if you go to esgindia.org, you will find this report. You can download it, and you can enjoy some of the conversations we had. In fact, all the conversations are also online at this link, and you may download it and enjoy them at your leisure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rajiv.
I am Rohit. I'm one of the co-founders of WILAC, that is Young Leaders for Active Citizenship. Let me tell you very quickly about what WILAC was. WILAC was founded with the aim of deepening engagement and building the capacity of young people. So we work with young people across the country, from high school to young professionals, to sort of figure interesting ways in which they can engage with the government and their communities. And one of the ways in which we've been wanting to sort of work over a period of time is figure out a platform where young people can come together and be supported, to sort of work around issues that are affecting their lives in their communities and their localities. And we wanted to call this, platform an active citizenship labs. So when the opportunity came to collaborate with Bengaluru Moving, we jumped at it. And the idea was to figure out how we can get citizens together and put them in the driving seat to figure out ways in which their city can be decongested, and help them figure out what can they do, who can they approach, and how can they get other people involved in supporting and sort of figuring out how mobility issues in Bengaluru can be resolved. So what we decided was that there would be two components to this work that we do. The first is what we call the mobility champions, and the idea was to sort of induct some really passionate people, from young professionals from Bengaluru, and get them to sort of identify solutions that can be used and then to advocate for that solutions. And the second was that since Bengaluru is a tech city and it has immense tech potential, to figure out how technology can be used to solve some of the mobility issues that we see in Bengaluru. And that was, we decided to address that through what we called a hackathon. And you will actually hear more on both of these in the sessions that follow. But let me very quickly tell you of what we sort of did through these. We were very ably supported in both these initiatives by our partners. I want to give a special shout out to WRI India, which came on as a knowledge partner, to Let Me Breathe, that came on as a storytelling partner, and to the government departments, DOLT and BMTC, that were phenomenal in the amount of time and the guidance they gave us, as well as the amount of information they shared with the fellows and how they guided them. These are the 12 mobility champions, some of whom you will hear from in the sessions that follow, and they've worked very passionately over the last couple of a month and a half, I suppose, to sort of try and address some of these issues that Bengaluru faces. We structured it as, our idea was to train some of these people in policy research and advocacy and help them then run campaigns. We were supported by two very great mentors, Brikesh, who is the chief operating officer of ASER and used to work with Greenpeace Mediterranean previously, and Aishwarya, who is with the Ola Mobility Institute. And basically the champions worked on three main issues. Number one, decongestion. Number two, first mile and last mile connectivity. And number three, non-motorized transport, basically figuring out how cycling and pedestrians can be better supported in the city. You will actually hear some of the interesting solutions they came up with and what they've been trying to advocate for in subsequent sessions. Let me very quickly also to tell you about the hackathon. So in the hackathon, what we decided to do was, try and attempt to create what we called a Bengaluru Connectivity Index, which was basically figure out how connected each region of Bengaluru is by, sourcing data from different sources. Of course, the data that is publicly available and through open databases, as well as to crowdsource information from citizens to figure out from a citizen's point of view as to what routes or transport options they could leverage, and from a government point of view to figure out what regions are better connected and what regions are underserviced, so that they can sort of serve these regions better. This hackathon was run in partnership with Skillenza on the platform Skillenza. We had about 1,500 people participate, and about 200 teams that gave in their concept notes, and they went through various stages. Finally, we had the 6 finalists present in front of a very eminent panel. And today the winner of this hackathon will talk to you about their solution and how that can be used to reduce congestion in Bangalore. I am very optimistic about how some of these things can be taken forward. And I think it's been an absolute fabulous journey for WILAC to partner with the Bengaluru Moving campaign. And we're really looking forward to see how this pans out. With that, let me end my stop here, and I'll hand it over back to the host.